What's up, everybody? Welcome to the Awkward Dadcast. I am your host and resident awkward dad, John. Thank you for joining me. Really appreciate you tuning in to episode 8 of the Awkward Dadcast. The last episode 7, was kind of a reintroduction to myself, my son with autism, our family. And so this episode, I want to do a little bit of a deeper dive into my son's journey with autism, his birth story, his diagnosis story, things like that. So thanks for tuning in. If you like this content, if it encourages you, please hit like on this video. Please follow, subscribe. I really appreciate it. Thanks a lot. Okay, so diving right in, let's talk about Jude's birth. So my wife, Lainey, and I, we found out she was pregnant in the summer of 2008. We were in a worship band together, and we were traveling around a lot that summer. That was the most traveling that we've ever done, doing events, doing youth camps, doing collegiate camps and events, things like that. So she was pregnant as we were traveling around. She dealt with morning sickness, but really her morning sickness is all-day sickness, all day, every day sickness. And so that was rough on the road as she was having false contractions, the Braxton Hicks contractions, making her feel like she's going into labor way too early, right? So she was scared. This is our first pregnancy. We didn't know what to expect. All we knew was this. So it was a bit scary with those false contractions, and her being sick every day was just very tough. The due date was set for late March of 2009. And since we were so naive, this is our first time, we thought that the due date is set. It's set in stone. Like we can keep doing events and things up until that date. So we actually had events planned, in February 2009. We had something in Grapevine, Texas, which was about 5.5 hours away from where we lived in Lubbock. We had plans with friends right after that in Oklahoma. And then we had another event planned for the next week in El Paso. So a lot of travel there, and we just did not know that you don't really want to do that. You don't really want to plan travel in the later stages of pregnancy. So, and I'm really glad that she did not go into labor on the way to El Paso, because there's just a desolate, barren path out there, and it would have been bad. So we had an event planned in Grapevine, Texas, like I said, early February, and as a side note, on the way there, we both managed to disable our phones, break our phones. I forget what Lainey did to hers, but I remember setting mine down in the car, in the console, in a cup holder. This was at night, and I think we were traveling there. And it turns out there was a cup of water in that console cup holder, and I just put my phone right down there in a cup of water, and it was dead. I mean, it stayed there for a while. I didn't realize it, and it was dead. So we had no phones, right? So we get there, we're doing the worship sessions with the kids, and after one of the worship sessions, this is maybe the second day there, we were back at the host home where we were staying, and Lainey's water broke, and we were in shock. We did not plan for this to happen. We were going, this isn't the plan. The due date is in March. What's going on? We were the only ones at the home at the time, and we had no phones. So we decided to just head out and drive around, look for a hospital. So thankfully, as we were headed out the door, my hand was on the doorknob, opening the door. The minister who had hired us for the event, he was about to knock on the door. He was coming to check on us. And so he had his hand raised to knock on the door. Whenever I opened the door and I saw him, I said, "Man, I'm so glad you're here. We need to find a hospital. Can you take us to a hospital? Lainey's in labor." And he goes, "Oh my gosh, yes. Okay, come on, follow me." So thankfully he was there. He took us to Baylor Medical Center. So it was a really good situation. And thankfully we didn't have to drive around forever looking for a hospital. So like I said, we were in shock. We never thought Lainey would go into labor before the due date, and we were not ready. We were there with our band. We had band gear. We had guitars, amps, drums. We had nothing for a baby. We had no clothes. We had no car seat. We had nothing for the baby. And so But in that moment, all we knew was she's in labor. We have to get her to the hospital. So I got her there. Thankfully, as she's in labor, that was closer to where we grew up in East Texas. So a lot of our family was actually able to drive up a lot easier than they would have been able to drive to Lubbock. So instead of a 7 or 8 hour drive from East Texas to Lubbock, they were able to drive 2.5, 3 hours, depending on where they live in East Texas, to Grapevine to be there for the birth. So that was actually kind of convenient. We had still had a baby shower planned, scheduled in East Texas. So it was kind of cool because family and friends were able to just bring those gifts to us and bring us what we needed as far as, baby clothes, car seat, things like that. So that kind of worked out nice. But Jude William Wooten was born on February the 7th, 2009, 6 weeks early. And since he was 6 weeks early, he automatically had to go to the NICU, the NICU. So he had a 2-vessel cord, they told us, when he was born. And of course I was asking, well, what does that mean? What are the ramifications of that? And they made it a point to tell us he had a 2-vessel cord. And so I was waiting on some kind of a major ramification of that. And they said, well, I mean, nothing really. It's fine. Babies can do just fine with 2 vessels in the cord. So, it's not that big of a deal. And I thought that was weird. I thought, well, you were kind of making a big deal about it for a second, but I still to this day don't really know what the ramifications are of that. Probably should look into it. But he had that, and he had a grunt when he breathed, and so and jaundice, and so they, the NICU, he was headed straight for the NICU. The NICU life, as many of you know, I'm assuming that I probably have some families here, some people here watching that are part of NICU families or hospital families who have medically fragile children or who've had birth stories similar to this. As you know, the NICU life can be hard. The hospital life can be very hard. It can be very exhausting. Every time you go in to see your baby, you have to scrub up, you have to gown up and mask up. It's a big ordeal to keep the other babies there who are immunocompromised and things like that, keep them safe, to keep it a sterile environment. It can be exhausting, but you want to be in there, be near your baby. So that's what you got to do. Laney had already had to hand him off so quickly because, he was so premature and he was at risk for just not doing well. That after he was born, she got to hold him for just a little while, and then had to give him to the nurse. But when you're in the NICU, most babies are, in an incubator. They have monitors on them. They have tubes. And they have all kinds of things attached to them, and you can't just hold your baby. So that's another thing that's very hard about the NICU life. You want to be near your baby, but you might not be able to hold them. And if you do, it's like an ordeal. They'll help you get your baby out, but it's such an ordeal. You worry about pulling on a cord or a tube and hurting your baby, and you just don't feel like there's anything you can do for your baby. It's very hard. It's like your child's right there, but you're at the mercy of, the hospital and the NICU, and sometimes there's not very much that you can do for your baby. The NICU can be a very sad place. There are a lot of children there that are really bad off, really medically in a bad place, and we were very grateful that Jude was not near as bad off as many of the kids in there, but it's just a very sad place. There are people there who really, really need support. They really need encouragement. We kind of saw it as a place to try to encourage people, pray for people. It can be kind of a mission field for people to go and love on people, pray for people, and offer support and help. But the days can be long. Your baby's there. You want to be there with your baby, but there's nothing you can do. It's just, time's ticking by slow, wondering how long you'll be. You're waiting on a doctor to come in to kind of give a report. It's rough. It's rough. So if you haven't experienced that, count your blessings on that. There are many families out there with medically fragile children that they have to spend a lot of time in the hospital, a lot of doctor's visits, and NICU life. So the host home owners who had put us up for the event, they were very, very gracious to us. They let us stay as long as we needed, and they told us, hey, look, you can come and go whenever you want. We were coming and going, all times of the day, middle of the night, whatever. They're letting us do laundry there. We really appreciated them. They were a godsend. They only signed up for us to be there, over a weekend, and then it ended up being, I guess, all in all, 13, 14 days, because Jude ended up being in the NICU for 10 days. While we were there, a tornado came close to the hospital. It did shatter some windows. It damaged the building in some places, not near where we were, thankfully. But I do remember a nurse telling us, if the windows blow out, there was big windows in the NICU. Thankfully, we had a view outside. That was nice. But the nurse saying, if these windows blow out, grab your baby and run this way, the opposite way. And Lainey and I just looked at each other like, how are we going to do that? How are you going to grab your baby who's connected to monitors and tubes and things and run? And then we're looking at so many of the other babies that have way more equipment and tubes and things connected to them. And many of them, no family there, because family have to work and they have to be, supporting other kids and things like that. So I'm thinking, oh my gosh, this is terrible. Like, what if something does happen? Like, that would be awful, So thankfully we didn't have to do that. The tornado, it just caused minor damage to the hospital in a different area, but that was nerve-wracking. So it was stressful because we were not in our town that we lived, and so I was calling into work, trying to keep people at work updated. Thankfully, they were very gracious to let me have time off to be there. The church that we were serving at, we were trying to keep them updated on when we might be back. And again, we had no phones, so we were borrowing phones when we needed to make calls, trying to keep family updated and all that. It was a lot. That was another layer to the stress. But after 10 days in the NICU, we got to take Jude home. He passed his car seat test, which is like a 6-hour test. If you live away from home, your child has to be able to do a car seat test, show and prove that they can be in the car seat for as long as they need to be to make it home. That was hard, but he did that. He made that, and we got him home. The first night that he was home, I was freaked out. And I didn't really know how to handle it, because all of a sudden there were no monitors to look at with his vital signs. There were no noises coming from equipment. There were no beeps. There were no indicators that, while we slept and while he slept, that he was okay. I thought, okay, how are we going to know that he's okay, right? It was just like, I didn't realize how conditioned I was to the environment of the NICU and how much comfort that brought me, just knowing that he's okay because of monitors and things. So of course we got used to it, but it was tough at first. He was so small. He was just so fragile. Anyway, we were learning it all. We were learning how to take care of him. He had a what they call a billy bed sent to the house. It's basically like a UV light bed. Some people joke about it being a tanning bed or whatever, but he had jaundice, and so he had to be in that. He had the light therapy in the hospital. He had his little glasses on, his little, that would block the light from his eyes. So we got used to, trying to get this little guy better. We were encouraged to call early childhood intervention, ECI, because he was premature. And since a lot of times whenever a child is born premature, they are just more prone to other health issues and things. So he was evaluated at 4 months, and he failed at joint attention, and it's where have you follow the finger with your eyes. He did not follow the finger with his eyes, and they say this is a classic sign of autism, and this qualified him for ECI services. So they give resources, and they give therapies and things like that to people who qualify. As months go by, he's getting older and developing. Lainey is noticing more and more, things about him that just kind of seem off. I didn't really notice anything that was kind of off or wrong with him because I guess I mean, I wasn't home with him all day, and he was our first child. I didn't really have anything to compare him to, so I was kind of, kind of going, what's the big deal here? But Laney was noticing more things. He was having a hard time doing eye contact. He would not respond typically whenever you would call his name. He actually got to where he seemed like he was panicking when you call his name, and he would try to run away from you. So that's obviously odd. So Laney called for another evaluation. ECI did another evaluation, and they were seeing the signs that were pointing to something like autism, right? So we saw a psychologist. We had an appointment set up with a psychologist, and at 17 months old, she diagnosed him with PDD-NOS, which stands for Pervasive Developmental Disorder, not otherwise specified. And she told us, she said, look, this is basically saying that he has autism, but 17 months is way too young to officially diagnose anybody with autism. We don't give autism diagnosis to people, I think it was under 3 years old, something like that. So this is basically what we give them. It's like a, not otherwise specified thing. It's kind of a broad term, an umbrella thing. And so, but basically, it looks like he's going to have autism. And so I was kind of shocked, and I was kind of downplaying the diagnosis. I guess I was in denial that he had autism, because again, I didn't have anything else to compare him to. He seemed pretty normal to me. And I thought he could recover. I didn't really know what to think, honestly. But I remember asking her, I said, well, he can get better, right? And she looked down at the floor and, looked very much not hopeful, but she said, maybe, maybe he can. I guess she didn't want to just shut the door on that, but she did not look hopeful. And I was surprised by her answer. And I downplayed the diagnosis. I really did. I thought, well, we'll just move on. Maybe he's a little different, and that's not a big deal, So I became a stay-at-home dad after our second child was born. My wife was working at a church, and she did not want to put, and we did not want to put the babies in daycare. We didn't want to put our newborn in daycare. After her 6-week maternity leave, I became a stay-at-home dad because, frankly, she was making more money than me, and I thought that I could pursue some kind of side projects, some entrepreneurial ideas, and I thought I would have plenty of time being a stay-at-home dad with 2 kids at home and a new baby. That turned out to not be true. I found out that staying home with 2 kids is a full-time job. And especially with a child like Jude, he was very active, very hard to control. He turned out to be an elopement risk. He started to run from me, and he wouldn't respond to a verbal command like stop, come back. He wasn't responding to verbal commands much at all. He seemed to not know what to do with that. His speech was not developing. And it was tough. It was hard, honestly, being home and trying to control him, trying to, just do a normal life with him. He was, exiting his nap phase. Like, I remember trying really hard to keep him taking naps because that would give me a break. But I remember driving around in the car with both of them, with the baby and Jude, and trying to get him to fall asleep. And it was getting to the point that the baby would fall asleep right when we got in the car, and then Jude would take so long sometimes to get him to fall asleep. He was just so worked up, his mind was going, that by the time he went to sleep, the baby was waking up, and I thought, this is not working. This is not going to work much longer. But he was just a very, very energetic child. He had endless energy. He was very rowdy, and he was starting to get destructive, and he was starting to have mood swings. He would get into just a bad mood and be very, very upset and just whine and cry and scream, and you just really didn't know why. Looking back now, I realized that there were things that were overstimulating to him. He was not able to process stimuli, audio or visual or whatever, and we didn't know. He started school at 3, and of course they were having trouble with him in class. We were getting those, those reports about that, and we were having trouble with him everywhere. Gatherings became very difficult. We were having a hard time, friend gatherings, family gatherings, things like that, because I had to have my eye on him at all times. In the beginning, I had to just know where he was, because I thought, he's going to run off. And then it got to where he was messing with people. He would be destructive at their house, mess with their kids, just do things that were destructive. And I would just have to be right on him. So at a gathering, I couldn't have a conversation with anybody. I would try, and then he would get on somebody's, get into their things or mess with a kid, and I'd have to, just drop the conversation and just run and go be with them. It was just getting very difficult. I was having to, I was spending time, explaining his behaviors, because it was obvious that he was doing things that were not typical of his peers, and people were, noticing. And so you have to explain, oh man, sorry about that. He's kind of got a thing with that. It was getting tough. Church was getting tough. We were leading worship, playing music in churches, and our home church, every week. And so they would be in childcare a lot. And sometimes for band rehearsals and things like that, they would be in childcare for an extended period of time. And so that became really, really challenging. The childcare workers trying to keep him occupied and busy, and then trying to keep a hold of him so he doesn't run away. It was getting hard. It was getting very, very hard. So we decided in 2012 that we needed to be near family for support, for family support. So we moved back to East Texas late 2012 to be near family. We moved in with my in-laws as we were looking for a house. We decided to build a house with my father-in-law being our contractor. And so we knew that our stay there with them would be extended. And that was tough, because if any of you have lived with somebody else or in someone else's house with a child with autism, you know that it can just be nerve-wracking, because there's a whole new set of things that you don't want them to break, to mess with. And our son was pretty destructive. And so it was just nerve-wracking, trying to keep him away from people's stuff, trying to keep him away from, from not breaking things in the house. It was always tough. We were trying to, of course, be as frugal as we could with the house that we were building. So we were doing a lot of the labor ourselves. So the process took about 2.5 years, honestly. And it was hard to find time to work on the house. Many times it would be after he was asleep. We'd try to get him to sleep, because he was getting really hard to handle. He became aggressive at this time, physically aggressive. Whenever he would have one of his mood swings or meltdowns, as they call them, he could get violent. If he didn't get what he wanted, if he was frustrated by not being able to just verbalize what he wanted or what he needed, he could lash out, or if it was because of just like stimuli, and at this time we still didn't know what a lot of his triggers were, but he was starting to scratch, bite, hit, kick, and all those things, and so he would come after us, my wife and I, and it was a pretty dark time, because it's just not a natural thing. Your child, even though he's 3, your child lashing out at you, it just doesn't feel right. And as years go by, his aggression was getting worse, and he was getting stronger. And even though he's small, even though you have a 3, 4, 5, 6-year-old child who is less strong than you, smaller than you wouldn't think that the aggression would be that big of a deal. Honestly, at least Jude, I don't know about all kids with autism, but whenever he would come after me and try to fight me, it seemed like he had superhuman strength sometimes, because I guess because those kids, they give everything, right? It's like almost like the fight or flight response or some kind of like, animal instinct thing. But whenever he feels either unsafe or threatened or just mad because he's not getting what he wants, he would come at me with everything. I think he would just give it his all. And you realize that most of the time, if you're fighting somebody or whatever, you're not giving 100% of your strength, right? I mean, you're going to try to conserve some strength. It's just natural. Like, you don't even think about it. You're going to try to be able to, you want to be able to fight and then maybe get away. It's like he would give 100% of his strength, and it was like he was way stronger for his age than he should have been. But many times after a fight, he would just collapse and he'd be so worn out, and I'm realizing it's because he's given it his all. And so it was a big deal. The aggression was a big deal. He was definitely affecting the family a lot. It was hard at school as his behaviors came more frequently and became worse and worse. We were getting calls from the school. They had written into his behavior intervention plan at that time that I think if they couldn't get him to regulate after, I think, 20 minutes, like after a meltdown started, they would call us and we need to come get him. And at that time, we had another toddler at home and my wife was pregnant. So for her to be able to just pick up and go to the school and go get him whenever he had a meltdown that lasted more than 20 minutes, that was tough. That was not an easy thing. His behaviors and those things were becoming more frequent, So she couldn't just, load up the toddler, go to the school and deal with like an obstinate, aggressive child. She's pregnant. It's just not working out. So I ended up having to get a job that was going to let me have more flexibility and go get him. At that time I was working, at a place that would, need me to travel some. And sometimes it was like last minute travel. There was unexpected overtime happening all the time. And it wasn't working out for our family. And I had to be closer to him. So I ended up getting a job at the school that he was at so that possibly I could go be with him when he was having one of these meltdowns and try to calm him down so he could stay at school and finish his day at school. And then if not, I'd be there where I could pick him up and take him home. Thankfully, my department that I worked for and the director that I had, they were very, very good to me, and they would allow me to go whenever I needed to go. So I could be there and be there for support, honestly, and it was that was what our family needed at that time. Sadly, it was quite a bit less money. Like I told you, there was a lot of overtime in the previous job, and I just couldn't do it, And sadly, there's a lot of this in the community, right? Families having to make choices because of their child with autism, and I mean, I know people who have had to go down to part-time jobs and they're struggling to make it, but they're trying to support their child, and it can just be hard. It can just be really hard on families. So during this time, things are getting worse. This is around 2014, going into 2015, but things were getting worse. Lainey was having a hard time controlling him after school. I was driving a school bus at that time, and so he would get home a couple of hours before I would, and so she would have him there for a couple of hours without me, and he was just getting harder and harder to handle. He was such a wild card, and he was still an elopement risk, and so he would take off out of the house. She's trying to get him to come back. It was really hard. And so I had to quit the bus route, and really it got to a place where if he was home, I needed to be home. So that's what we did. We got to the point where if he was home, I was home. And he was still able to ride the school bus. He actually enjoyed the school bus. But after a while, he got to where he was getting up and trying to move around in the school bus, and they had to use a harness for him. And he was breaking harnesses and things like that. So at some point, he wasn't even able to ride the bus. So I began to drive him to school, and then I would work. And then I would have to pick him up at release time and take him home. So it was literally, if he was at school, that's when I could work, and that was it. It got that bad. His aggression got that bad. And there's something that does to you. A person's autonomy is taken away, and there's just something psychological that does to a person that you never see coming. There's no hanging out with friends. There's no like evening or weekend projects. There's no like helping somebody out. Like you just naturally hear about somebody in the community that has a need that maybe you could go help with, and my situation just cut all that out. There was no way I could like go help somebody fix something at their house or something like that. My life became all about him, and that does something to you. This is the phase of my life that I entered into where I started to have wounds from my son on me. He was scratching so badly. His nails were just hard to keep short, but when he was mad, he would hit, he would bite, and he would scratch. And I would have scratch marks all over me, scratch marks on my neck, on my face, on my arm. My arms would be so torn up and sometimes actively bleeding. That's awkward, right? It's awkward to go to work and, there's an obvious major scar on your neck and you're just like, hey guys, here I am. And they're thinking, what is up with that? Sometimes people will say something, they don't know that, they don't know what's going on. And so I've had a coworker say to me, what, did the cat scratch you or whatever? And, you just laugh and go, what do you want to say? No, it was my kid, actually. My kid's beating me up. So that's tough. And I know that there are people out there dealing with the same thing. But that's hard, having bruises, scratches, bite marks on you. My arms would be covered with a bite mark, and then it would bruise over, and then there'd be a scratch over that, and there'd be scabs. It was terrible. During this time, we had started the med journey, and honestly, we had started that even before we moved back to East Texas. But it was getting to the point where he needed more and more heavier med support to try to stabilize his mood and to try to make him controllable. And the med journey it's been a tough one. And honestly, it still is. He's 15 and we're still trying to, get his meds dialed in. The hardest part about this is that it's kind of trial and error, right? No two kids are the same, and medicines work differently for different kids. And some of these meds are dangerous. Some of these meds, they're heavy duty, psychotropic meds that we're talking about here. Some of them have major side effects, and having to keep your eye open for these side effects can get tricky because sometimes you don't see the side effect that's actually dangerous right off the bat, but there may be signs, right? It's like you're watching him for a certain type of eye fluttering or whatever, and when he's on the move a lot, it's hard to see. But some of these side effects can be very severe. Some can be lifelong, and some of the meds that work the best can have the worst side effects, and it's very disheartening. It's very stressful, and it's tough, man. It's tough for our families. Let's see. Some of these meds will make you think that there's improvement happening, but you can't really tell for sure. You're kind of going, what's going on? Some meds have like this on-ramp of, sometimes 2 weeks, sometimes longer, actually. Like they don't start working until you've been on them for a certain period of time. And so, you go through periods during that time where you have good days and you think, oh, maybe it's working. And then, you tank and have some terrible days and you go, oh my gosh, maybe we shouldn't take this med, but you're not even ramped up yet to know if it's the med working. And so it's just confusing, sometimes they start two meds at the same time and you don't know which one is working. If you see improvement, you go, is that this medicine or that? Sometimes they have to be tapered off. You can't just quit cold turkey, right? So it's an exhausting and very frustrating and very disheartening journey. Nobody wants their kids to have to be on heavy meds, right? Nobody wants their kids to have side effects. Nobody wants this, but it's like, how do we manage our life? How do we make his life work today? And that's all you got, right? Thankfully, Jude was able to learn how to take pills fairly easily. I remember working with him one day and getting him to swallow a pill, and I thought, this is incredible. Many people have to try to crush up pills, hide it in food or drink, and that's a scary thing too, right? Because if you're trying to mix up something in a kid's drink or food, and they don't finish the whole drink, and they don't really, you don't know if they got the full dose. It's just a hard thing. It really is. I know that there's a lot of judgment out there these days for families putting their kids on these meds, but unless you've walked in these shoes, you don't know what it's like. So it's a very hard thing. We were stuck at home a lot. This is another common theme for families with kids with autism and other special needs. We were not able to go out a lot, and I'm talking even like, hey guys, let's go down to the park, or hey, let's go eat out, or hey, let's go grocery shopping on Saturday. It was getting to where we could not go out. Outings were very hard. They were very risky. My son would always want to go and run off. He would just explore the world. I guess if you let him, I don't know. We've talked about that. I've said if he could be in some kind of environment where we had, people, like we had the eye of the sky. We had people watching him, and we could just let him go. I wonder where he would go, because it just seems like he wanted to just run off into the world, and so it was hard to hang on to him. And if he saw something that he wanted across the store, he was going to bolt and go get it. And so, you had to have your hand on him. We tried the whole harness thing. But honestly, it's like, even if you have a good hold on him and he's freaking out at the end of this leash or at the end of your arm, screaming and trying to get to someplace, I mean, that's just impossible, right? You just can't be out in public like that. The looks you get from strangers are incredible. It's just like, wow, people they don't understand. And so outings get very, very less frequent, and you just kind of get stuck at home. My in-laws were actually able to allow us to go out some. I mean, Lainey and I were able to go out on dates because of my in-laws. They were incredible in that way. And my father-in-law, he was great with Jude. He was able to physically, wrangle him, and he could chase him and things like that. So we felt really good about leaving him, with my in-laws because, they were able to. But my father-in-law, Bob, he allowed us to do so much. It was incredible. He allowed us to be in church. My wife was serving on staff at a church, and my son would not even go in the building because we were meeting at a convention center, and just the space, the ambience of that space, I guess it was just overwhelming for him. He just couldn't be in there. And then, the sound, whatever, it was overwhelming. So we would always try. And usually Jude and I would end up, trying and then heading out, and we would drive around town. Sometimes we would walk around the downtown square, which was nice because nobody else was out. It was Sunday morning, but church was like, almost impossible. But Bob allowed us to go to church, and he even let me serve in the church. He said, you know what, I want to let you serve like in the media department. Sometimes I would get to play guitar. But Bob said, you know what, I want to take care of Jude. I want to give you and Lainey the opportunity to be in church and be a part of your church. And so that was incredible. He let us do so much. But things did end up getting bad enough that Bob would struggle with him. 2019 was getting really, really hard. And, Jude was getting bigger. My father-in-law was in his 60s. It was just getting harder. And then, when 2020 happened, it just, it was very hard. We had acquired funding for PCS, personal care services, which is very sought after. But we had gotten that, and it can be a challenge. as well, because we were in charge of hiring and firing people. And so while we did have that help of being able to hire, somebody to be with them, trying to hire maybe a therapist or somebody that could do some work with them, mainly somebody that could be with them so that, I could work, because summertime was impossible with him. It was getting to where he couldn't be, home just with my wife and family in the summer and be okay, because he was running around the neighborhood, getting into people's things, getting into, messing with people. He was really causing problems. And so we were able to hire, some people for that. But it still had its challenges. There was a time that Jude got away from a therapist. Lainey and the kids and this therapist were in Walmart during the summer. And even though he was a young, very athletic male therapist who was watching Jude very, very well, Jude was able to create a diversion. And he was in the shopping cart, and he dumped out a box of dry spaghetti, and it goes everywhere, right? Well, Lainey, she goes down to start picking it up. Well, the therapist very, very nicely, he reached down to start gathering it up as well. Well, Jude takes that opportunity to jump out of the cart and run away. And by the time they looked up, he had gotten to the end of the aisle, and he turned, and they didn't know which way he turned. So he took that opportunity to, I guess, run out of Walmart. Now, they didn't know he ran out at that time. The therapist went off to go find him, and he took a while trying to find him and couldn't find him. And so there was some miscommunication there, and the Walmart staff were not alerted to the fact that there was a child missing very quickly. That should have been conveyed to them immediately, but it wasn't. And so anyway, my son was able to get out of Walmart and go across a very busy parking lot and navigate all this traffic and these cars and go to a nearby Chick-fil-A, where he was able to go in unnoticed because people just didn't notice him. He went straight to the play place where there's a bunch of kids in there. So nobody took notice of him being in there, or nobody thought, oh, this kid's here without his parents, because there were other kids in the play place without their parents. And so he was missing for about, I don't know how long. 20 minutes, maybe longer. And so, and of course I was able to leave work and come and look for him. And it ended up being a really good situation, because there ended up being people eating lunch there that were firefighters, there were EMS people, and there were people there that we knew who were able to contact, that they knew who he was. And once he got noticed, they knew who to contact. And so we actually knew the manager there. So it turned out to be a very, very good thing. I feel like God was just he had his hand on him the whole time. But all that to say, sometimes even with the best help that you've got, things happen. And so it's just nerve-wracking. This life is just very, it can be very nerve-wracking. Let's see, I get here to 2020, and the year 2020, it was awful. As many of you know, March 2020 is really when a lot of things shut down, right? That was the beginning of the 2 weeks to flatten the curve or to slow the spread or whatever. We started spring break, and I was home with him because there was no way I can work if he's off school. School holidays and breaks had become just impossible. So spring break was hard enough already. And then, of course, that turned into an indefinite break, right? We got a call. We actually got a note from our school, like an email, saying that, or a voicemail, saying that they didn't plan on closing down the schools because, the world was hearing about COVID, but they didn't think it was an issue, right? Well, then apparently a couple of days later, however it was mandated, the school decided we got to close down. So, late in the spring break, we get a call saying that this was going to be an indefinite break and that we had to, stay safe because of COVID and all that. And that was a nightmare. That call was like a nightmare for me. I was already not able to work. and I had to be on him all day. And I thought, this is not going to work. He doesn't want to be home. He actually likes school. And anytime he had a break from school or a school holiday, he wasn't happy about that. He got to where he didn't understand why am I not in school, And so it was like his worst nightmare, which turned into our worst nightmare. I had to be on him all day, every day. I was thankfully able to work after hours. My director, he allowed me to come in after hours and work. So I would be with Jude all day, running around the neighborhood with him, trying to keep him out of people's houses, trying to keep him out of people's stuff, trying to keep him from running away. But also trying to, give him somewhat of a fun life, trying to entertain him a little bit. And then whenever he went to sleep at night and I made sure he was asleep, I would go to work. And I was really grateful that my employer let me do that, but it was definitely exhausting. I wasn't able to work, full 8 hours, but I was able to get some hours in. But man, those were hard times. Those were really hard times. During the summer, as things just went on, and he was becoming more and more of a burden on our neighborhood. I could dive into that. There are many things that I wish I would have done differently and that I regret during all that. But we did the best that we could. We decided that we needed to get out of our neighborhood. We needed to sell the house and move. He was just all over the neighborhood, and there'd be times where he would go in people's houses, he would mess with their stuff, he would get into their garage, he would break their stuff, he would pour out paint, he would try to interact with some of the kids in the neighborhood as well as he knew how, but it was just he didn't know how. It was not an appropriate interaction. He made people uncomfortable. And more. And I was not able to really keep up with him. And even whenever I did, looking back now, I realize I don't know if I handled it as well as I could, because sometimes he would want to be at somebody's house and I would think I was doing good just to keep him from going in the house. But, maybe we were walking around their yard and stuff. And so, I was in survival mode trying to do the best I could. But now looking back, I realized that we really probably, traipsed on the graces of our neighbors a little too much there. So we knew that we had to leave, and it was hard because the house, we built it over 2.5 years. My father-in-law was our contractor, and there were so many personal touches that he put into it. He had gotten reclaimed wood. He had cut down 17 pine trees from his front yard, and we milled those trees into boards, and we used boards in this house for flooring, for walls, for all kinds of things. And so there was a lot of sentimental value in this house, and we hated to leave it, but we knew we had to go. We had to get Jude out of this area, so we sell the house. So this has been building up for a while, and we had planned on buying some land with my in-laws, and each of us building a house out on some land away from people. And so that was really our plan. And during that whole plan, we had some land under contract, and my father-in-law had to go into the hospital. He had COVID for a while, and it just wasn't getting better. It was getting worse and worse, and he finally could not get his breath, and he thought, I got to go to the hospital and get this sorted out. So he went to the hospital. We put a hold on the plans for the land. The house sells, and we had to find a rental. So we were trying to find a rental. My wife was looking at places, trying to find something that was not in a neighborhood and that was not close to a highway, or a major road. And so there wouldn't be, dangers for Jude to run out into. That was hard, but we did find one. She found a place, and it was a small, older house. So we we sell our house, we move into that rent house, and that was a dark time because Jude he loved our house, loved it, and that's really what he had known since he was very young, and so he had a really hard time leaving the house. It was very bad. It caused regression in his behaviors and in his ability to, like his toileting ability. He regressed in that. There was no bathtub in the house. It was just a one bathroom house, and there was a shower in there. He did not want to shower. He liked a bath, and so he would refuse to shower. So we're having to figure out how to bathe him. It was a very tough time. Then my father-in-law is not getting better. And as you all remember, at that time during COVID, they weren't letting people to come visit relatives in the hospital. And so we really couldn't, we were talking to doctors on the phone, talking to nurses, trying to get the details about how he's doing, what's going on. And we couldn't really get a good read on how he was doing because we weren't there. And so, you can get word, you can get a report from a doctor, but that if you're looking at spending time with and talking to your loved one, that you're going to know better how they're doing than if you get a report from a doctor. But we weren't able to do that. Not even his wife could. My mother-in-law couldn't even go in, and so we did get him moved to a hospital in a nearby city that would let family come in and visit. So we did find out that was actually up to the hospital and not, mandated by the state as we were told. Anyway, that's a side thing. That's a topic for another podcast. But anyway, long story short, he did not get better and he passed away. So we lost my father-in-law, and that was like a shock to the family. It was just a huge blow. He was like the Superman of the family. Jude loved him, and it was a huge shock when he died. We had sold our house around that same time. We're having a hard time in this rent house. Things were it was terrible. It was so terrible. Jude was regressing. His behaviors were getting worse. And so we ended up moving in with my mother-in-law after my father-in-law died to sort of support her, be there for her. And that ended up being a good situation. Actually, we were moving back into the neighborhood that we left, thinking that it was going to be terrible, and it actually worked out way better this time for whatever reason. But we were back in my in-laws' house, and so we were still having the issues though of even though school had started back up again, fall of 2020. We knew that any school holiday, any week-long break, Christmas break, Thanksgiving break, I was going to have to be home with him, and we just could not maintain. I could not make an income to support our family. We just couldn't do it. So we decided to work for ourselves. We had started building spec homes with the guidance of my father-in-law, and we knew that we were going to have to go into that fully and that be our career so that I could have flexibility. I wouldn't have to work a 9-to-5 job or, 7:30 to 3:30 as it turned out. I was going to have to work for myself so I could have some flexibility. So we did start doing that, and that did help. That helped me to be around and have a lot more flexibility for him. His aggression was getting worse, and it was getting even harder for attendants, people that we had hired through the personal care services to handle him. And it was there were just continuing to be problems with that. We called our local LIDA, and I talked about what that is in my last episode, but they're the local authority on intellectual, people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. They provide resources. They get people connected with state resources, things like that, state funding and all that good stuff. And there is a wait list many of you know about for HCS services, and it's like a year's long wait list. It's like a 10, 15-year long wait list. And we had gotten him on it early on because, we just didn't know he was going to need help with, whatever, therapy services, rehab, and possibly one day, a place to live after we're gone, whatever. But it's a year's long list. We had called to see if we had any other options about that. And so And talking with the lady there, she said, well, there is a crisis diversion slot. And so we thought, what is that? We've never heard of that. And it's for people who are definitely in crisis. And so we said, well, we feel like we're in crisis. He's physically hurting us every day. He's coming after us. We're having to, keep our kids safe from him. We're having to keep him safe from himself, having to keep him from running off, all this stuff. And so they sent somebody out to kind of just observe him, take a look at him, and I guess possibly try to talk to him, question him, interview him. And it just so happened that when the employee came over, that Jude and I were outside, and he was coming after me pretty hard. We were, I guess, in a fight, and I don't remember what it was about, but he was coming after me pretty hard. And the employee said, okay, you guys are in crisis. It just took him seeing a meltdown with the aggression and violence, seeing it for a minute for him to say, okay, you guys are in crisis. This is really, really bad. So we got the crisis diversion slot, and we began talking to the LITA about, possible options, things that he could, that would benefit him. Now, it had not entered our mind at all about him possibly going to live somewhere else, right? Another residential situation for him. And, I think that just never enters a parent's mind until it has to. But our doctor had, we had gone back and forth on meds, the whole trial and error thing with meds. That journey had been so just long and arduous that our doctor one day handed me a brochure for a place called Texana. And I said, oh, what is this? And he said, well, it's a residential treatment facility for kids like yours. And I said, oh, well, we're never going to do that. Thank you, doctor, but like we're not going to consider that. And that's, at the time he handed me that, Jude was probably 10. Maybe younger, but I want to say he was like 10. And I thought, there's no way. There's absolutely no way. I mean, life is hard, and this, at times seems impossible, but there's no way we're going to go this route. We're going to stick it out with our son, and this is our life. And we just kind of put that in the back of our mind. But then time went by, and he got older, and he got stronger, and he got more aggressive. He got more unpredictable, and he got to be more of a danger to himself, to his siblings, to me, to my wife. Now, thankfully, he was still coming after me primarily. If he was upset about something, or if he, was mad because he couldn't go somewhere, or he couldn't have a certain thing, he would mainly come after me, thankfully. But it was getting scary. It was getting really, really scary. We were having aggression happen in the car. We had him run into a highway one time. He broke loose from my wife at church and ran into a major highway in Texas, and just seemed to not have a care in the world about it. He seemed to have a manic. He was laughing. He just seemed to not really understand the danger. He had tried to jump out of our car going down the highway a few times. He was getting very scary. And so at some point we realized, this may have to be an option. I mean, him going somewhere may have to be an option. And it's a terrible thought. And it's a thought that you put in the back of your mind. It was like the day he got his diagnosis, I thought that's not really real, right? Him going to live in another place, I thought that's not real. That can't happen. Surely not. Well, one day we were having a family gathering. I think it was maybe been Thanksgiving, and he got really upset and overstimulated and just was having a really hard day. And he was trying to destroy things in the house. I think he was trying to, rake food off the table and just, whatever. And so I took him outside, and he started to attack me. And it was one of the worst attacks. It was one of the worst times that we'd ever had, where he just was not letting up. And it went on for so long, and he fought me so aggressively that I thought, I don't know if he's gonna stop, and I don't know what's gonna happen. He was scratching me, hitting me, biting me, just trying to hurt me. And it was kind of a wake up call. I thought, what's gonna happen here? And so we actually loaded him up in the van at that time to take him to the ER. because we had heard that sometimes you can find a placement, whatever, through your local ER, taking him to the hospital. The doctor will do an evaluation, and they could actually get them like an emergency placement in a residential facility. So that was in the back of our mind. And this attack that day was so hard. It was just so bad that we thought, we've got to do something. We have to take him somewhere. We have, at that time, 5 other kids that we can't be with, we can't take care of. We're trying to keep them safe. Jude has become a danger to them. He's a danger to himself. The only thing we can do is try to seek help. And so we took him to the ER. And I remember I just started bawling on the way to the ER because once you got in the car, and he calmed down for the ride. He was, he kind of broke out of his mindset of being really upset whenever Lainey said, "Hey, let's get in the car, take a ride." And so after the adrenaline stopped pumping and we were in the car and we were now in motion going to take him somewhere, the reality set in that he may be going somewhere tonight. And so even though I've been abused and we were fighting and things seemed impossible, the thought of him actually going somewhere was devastating. It hit me and I started bawling. And I thought, I cannot believe this. I can't believe that we're doing this. This can't be real. But also, the reality is that it had to happen. It had to be real. So we go and we, talk to the folks. He goes into the room fine. He's like cooperating. And so we hang out and the doctor says, we're going to do some calls. We're going to make some calls. They call so many places in Texas, residential treatment facilities, rehab places, ABA, places, all kinds of residential places. And they were turned down by everyone. I want to say it was 13. And the common answer was that they don't take kids with aggressive behavior or they didn't take kids that did not have their ADLs mastered. And ADL means activities of daily living. Basically toileting, right? If they can't, toilet by themselves, or if they need some help feeding, they can't come. And so with every no, we got more and more just downhearted and just, feeling hopeless about this whole thing, going, what is there for us? And so at the end of the night, when we had been there forever, for hours, we were all worn out. We were all tired. Jude was tired. We finally just went home. It's like you have this dramatic day. You have this huge fight. You're hopeless. Then, you think you're taking your kid somewhere, possibly that's heart-wrenching. Then you get there and there's no place for him to go. And just the gamut of emotions are just draining. And so we're exhausted and we go home. And, he had gotten past his meltdown and we went home and we went to bed. And so it was just a confusing day. And he didn't go anywhere that day. His aggression continued to get worse. And at this point we were even more hopeless because we thought, where can he go? Arletta told us about the State Supported Living Center, and which is like the state school, that they used to call them the state schools in Texas. And it's like what you think of whenever you think of institutionalizing your child. And we thought, we don't want that for him. We can't just take our son to a place like this, the state institution and check him in and drop him off. It just sounds horrible, But as we talked with them, had meetings with them, we realized there's no other option. So we started to make plans for him to go to the State Supported Living Center. And again, I was in that state of denial because the date was set in the future, and we were still having some meetings about it. And I was just like, okay, this is not going to happen. Just putting this off. But they set a date. So that was the plan. And we were just going on with life. We were just making it through day by day. And it came New Year's Eve, 2021, going into 2022. He was off school, so I was with him, and we were having a pretty good break, not too bad. But that New Year's Eve, we went to my parents' house and had a little party, had fireworks and all this, and he did great. He loved it. He wasn't too bad of a problem. He was distracted by the fireworks, and he loved that. We had a good night, so we went home and we go to bed. And since when he's sleeping or at school, that's about the only time I can work. He went to bed late, and I went to work. So I went out to the barn. I think I was loading my truck up, or I think I was unloading my truck. That's what it was. So I was stepping up and down out of the barn, out of and into the barn, unloading my truck. And so one of the times that I stepped down out of the barn, I stepped just to the left a little bit, and I stepped into a hole. My foot hit the side of a hole, and it just turned. I hear a snap, and I hit the ground. I have this immense pain, and I'm on the ground. And I remember thinking, oh no, what are we going to do with Jude? Because at this point, he is big and strong. I'm the only one who could physically handle him. It's on me. At this point, if he's having a meltdown, my wife is getting the kids, and they're going to another room, and they're locking the door to try to stay safe, right? So I immediately think, what's going to happen with Jude? I've just broken something. So I hobble into the house, and I wake my wife up, and this is right around midnight. I tell her I think I've broken my leg. She said, oh no. And she said, well, can you stand on it? Can you put weight on it? Because we're hoping still maybe it's not broken. And I actually could, but it's excruciating. So I said, I need to go to the ER. So I go to the ER. Sure enough, it's broken. And so they put me in a little, temporary cast, and I come home. And January 1, 2022, I was not able to stand up and help with my son. So my wife, she was like, let me try today. And she tried to handle him that day. And she had some friends who had helped with him and worked with him at school before come over and try to help out. And it became apparent that it was not going to work. He almost hurt her a few times, and it became apparent he is going to injure her. And then what are our other kids going to do? And it's just going to be bad. And so she said, I've got to take him somewhere. I've got to take him somewhere now. And she had heard that you could, there's a state hospital that we had heard that sometimes if you show up and you're in an emergency, they will admit somebody under emergency situations. And so she said, I've got to take him to the state hospital. And I was in disbelief. I was just in shock. I mean, knowing the situation is impossible, but also, just going, this can't happen. I mean, nobody ever wants to send their son or their child away. Nobody ever wants to say, my kid can't live here. We can't handle him, right? But that was our reality. So she loaded him up some clothes, and that night, she said, hey, let's go take a ride in the car. So she had a couple of friends go with her, and she drove him to the state hospital. The doctor saw him there. They heard her story. They, kind of evaluated him, and the doctor said, yeah, I think it's best that he stay here, at least until he's supposed to go to the state supported living center. And so she said that she hugged him. She said, Jude, I love you. She said, Jude, I'll be back. And that he said, okay. And he walked with the doctor, and they went back, beyond some doors. And for the first time ever, she drove off without our son. And so this was another time that was completely heartbreaking. You don't know how to cope with that reality. You don't know. I mean, you can never see it coming. It was just the worst day of our lives. And there's so many emotions, right? It's heartbreaking. Then there's a relief because you're not having to keep him safe. You're not having to keep the others safe because of him. There's just that heartache. There's the guilt from feeling that relief. There's just a depression because he's not with you. There's unaccounted for time without your son. You don't know what he's doing, who's with him. And then you have to carry on parenting your other kids. You have to carry on with your life, taking care of your other kids because they have a life too, and they're worth that. And so we began this phase of our lives and of his life where he lives somewhere else. We visited there often. They weren't able to let us visit early on. I don't think they wanted him to. They wanted him to try to regulate, and so they didn't let us visit right off the bat. But when we could, we visited as often as we could. And we got to know people there, and God does answer your prayers in those situations. We prayed that He would have people surrounding Him that love Him like their own, and God answered that prayer at the state hospital. And then when He did move into the state supported living center, we started to learn that these places are not just cold cinder block walls and just institutions, but there are people that make up this place. There are people who work with your son, who are with your son, and who actually care about the kids there. There are people who loved our son at both places. God answered those prayers, and He never has left our son's side. But we were encouraged by meeting people, getting to know people who truly and genuinely care about our son. When he got to the SSLC, he began to regulate to the routine there, to his meds. There's a full medical staff there. There's doctors on staff. There are nurses on staff. There are all kinds of people on staff, therapists, people taking data, people who work with him, behavioral people. He started to regulate, and the meds were getting dialed in, and behaviorally he was getting better. And we were very, very pleasantly shocked, pleasantly surprised. We were able to start doing home visits. And I was terrified. I was mortified because my life had changed so much from being on high alert all the time to not having to worry about him, not having to worry about the other kids being hurt by him. So it was nerve-wracking. The first, quite a few of the home visits that we did had me just a nervous wreck. We had some really good ones, and we had some really rough ones. It took a long time for him to truly get his behavior regulated. And I'm sure it was confusing to him, not understanding why am I coming home for a couple of days and then going back. But we never stopped trying, and we got to a place where the home visits were really good. And he was okay going back. He had gotten into his routine there. He was in a local school there. And, we actually were able to see how God is working in his life through this. God is able to turn this into something bearable, if not good, because his behaviors are regulating. He's getting better. Now, he's been there for 2.5 years, and we're on the path to bringing him back home, which is unprecedented. They talk about that not happening. Kids that come out of there, sometimes they go to another group home or another place like that, but rarely do they get discharged from there to home. Now, on that path, we've hit some snags, and we're still working towards the goal of bringing him home, but it's quite a journey. I tell this story to hopefully encourage families out there like mine, because for a long time, I thought that we were alone, and I thought nobody is dealing with stuff that we're dealing with. I thought, nobody out there is dealing with their kid beating them up. Nobody out there is dealing with having to make sure their kid doesn't run away and then possibly hurt somebody or run away and possibly damage a lot of things or possibly be hurt themselves. Nobody's having to deal with their kid reaching into the front seat and trying to punch you while you're driving, jumping out of the back of the car. Nobody's dealing with this stuff. But when we started to, and my wife really, speak out about this on social media, really my wife, she had a lot of moms message her and say, we're dealing with the same stuff. We thought we were alone, right? We're dealing with aggression, all this stuff. We didn't know there were other people like that. And we started to realize that people like us don't speak out about it because it's just hard. It's just a hard reality, and people don't understand. So my wife has started to speak out on social media about this. That's why I'm doing this podcast. I want to let you know you're not alone. You're not alone. And there are avenues to get help. I'm not saying that the residential facility avenue is the way for your child, but there are avenues for help. I will tell you this. My wife and I, but her more than me because she has a lot larger reach on social media, but she's got a lot of hate on social media because of our decision to have our son live somewhere else. She's got a lot of hate because people don't understand, right? She speaks out to show that this reality is there. This is a thing that people deal with, and to relate to families who are going through the same thing. They're out there. There are people who need a place like the state supported living center. There are people who need facilities like that. Jude has gotten great care there. Jude is loved there, believe it or not. I just want you to know that look, you know what's best for your child, right? Don't let the community, whether it be online or near you, tell you what is best for your child, okay? Sometimes loving your child does not look like you thought it would, right? We definitely would have never, ever envisioned this life for our child. We would have never thought that we would send him somewhere, even when it was really bad. We would say, no, he's going to stay with us. He can't, we're not going to send him off somewhere. Sometimes loving your child doesn't look like you thought it would. And it's pretty cocky to say what you would or wouldn't do in a certain situation if you haven't been there, if you haven't walked in those shoes. Many situations in life are like that, aren't they? But Jude's story and your child's story is still being written. God is not done with him. God's not done with Jude. I see him working in his life. I see him working in people's lives through Jude's life. I mean, it's just been incredible. The same is true with your child. God is not done with you or your family or your child yet. So please be encouraged by that. Thank you for joining me on the Awkward Dadcast. I plan on doing many more. Please feel free to comment, like this video, share it with your friends, and subscribe or follow whatever the platform you're watching or listening on says to do. Subscribe or follow. So thanks again. God bless you. I hope you have a great day.